Welcome back, guys, to Blackout War Stories. 74% of you still haven't subscribed. Before we start the video, hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. It was January of 1947 when I first set foot on the endless white of Antarctica. The Navy called it Operation Highjump, a grand expedition dressed up as research and training, but none of us believed it was just about mapping frozen wasteland. We were young, disciplined, and ready for anything, but deep down, we knew the brass only brought this many ships, aircraft, and men when they were chasing something they couldn't say out loud. The cold was the first thing that greeted me, sharper than any battlefield I'd seen in Europe, the kind that slips through layers of wool and canvas and stings the bone. We worked in silence most of the time, because words froze in the air before they reached your ears. Every breath felt like glass cutting down your throat. Yet despite all that, the silence of the ice was worse than the cold. It wasn't peace, it was absence, the kind that tells you you're trespassing. Our orders were clear on paper: establish bases, train for polar warfare, study survival in extreme conditions. But there were whispers, the kind that travel faster than any official memo. Men said we were hunting something hidden by the Germans at the tail end of the war. Others muttered about strange aerial sightings reported by pilots during reconnaissance over the ice. Most of us dismissed it as talk to pass the time. But once in a while, an officer's silence gave the rumors weight. I remember the first time something felt off. It was the third night after arrival, the 17th of January. I was standing watch near the edge of the ice shelf, the horizon swallowed by a pale twilight that never truly gave way tonight. The sea groaned beneath the ice, like something alive turning over, and then went still. Then I saw it, movement out there, where nothing should have moved. At first I thought it was the play of light, a mirage dancing on the edge of the world. But then the surface cracked, not like ice breaking, but like something rising beneath it. A bulge formed, stretched, and then sank again, leaving a black scar across the white. "Did you see that?" I whispered to Petty Officer Hughes, who stood beside me, rifle slung across his chest. He squinted through the frost, clinging to his lashes. "See what? Ice shifting?" I almost said yes, but I knew what shifting ice looked like. This was different. It was deliberate, alive. We didn't report it. What would we write? The ice moved wrong? Something pushed from below? The Navy wasn't interested in stories. They wanted reports neat enough to file and forget. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that black scar on the shelf, like the earth itself was warning us to turn back. The days blurred after that. We built our temporary shelters, ran drills, unloaded crates stamped with codes none of us recognized. Some were marked classified, do not open. That didn't stop rumors. Men swore they heard humming from inside certain containers at night, like machinery still alive after its voyage. When one crate vanished without any explanation, even the officers avoided questions. What unsettled me most was the way our mission commander, Admiral Byrd, carried himself. He was a veteran, calm under pressure, but I caught glimpses of something in his eyes when he studied the horizon, like he was waiting for an enemy none of us could name. He never spoke of it in briefings. He only emphasized discipline, secrecy, and obedience. The kind of tone that tells you the truth is being kept several layers above your clearance. Then came the order to move inland. We packed sleds, dogs, and supplies and trekked across a desert of ice that stretched farther than the mind could handle. Some men swore they saw shadows moving against the sky, but the air was too clear for tricks. Still, nobody wanted to be the one to write it down. Out there, in that frozen void, even silence felt like it had weight. Every crunch of boots in the snow sounded like it carried for miles, like something might hear us. On the 7th day inland, we found the wreck. It was an aircraft half buried in ice, its markings scratched away by wind and time. It wasn't one of ours, and it wasn't German either, at least not any model I'd ever seen in the war. The fuselage was too smooth, the metal too dark, almost as if it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. What struck me most was the hole torn through its side, edges melted instead of shattered. Fire does that, not impact. But what fire could burn in a place where everything froze in seconds? We stood there in silence, breath clouding in the air, eyes fixed on the impossible wreck. Hughes muttered a prayer under his breath. Another man laughed nervously, saying it was just some experimental prototype the brass never told us about. But deep down, none of us bought it. The officer in charge ordered us to mark the location, sketch what we could, and keep our mouths shut. Officially, he said, this doesn't exist. Write nothing about it in your logs. Do you understand? We all nodded, but the unease settled heavier than the cold. Soldiers live on routine, on clarity of orders, but here we were staring at something that bent both. That night, as I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the wind scrape across the ice, I realized something. We weren't in Antarctica to train, or map, or test survival. We were here because the Navy had already found something they couldn't explain, and whatever it was, we had just stumbled into it. The wreck wasn't the last thing we found. It was only the first crack in the ice, and what came after would tear everything open. The wreck we stumbled across never left my mind, though we were ordered to erase it from memory as soon as we found it. That's the thing about the military silence can be forced just as easily as discipline. A commanding officer looks you dead in the eye, tells you what you didn't see, and from that moment, it doesn't matter what you know. Officially, nothing happened. Unofficially, it haunts you. We continued inland after marking the site, dragging our sleds across terrain that didn't look like it belonged to Earth. Antarctica wasn't just ice and snow, it was endless walls of frozen blue, ridges that caught the sun and turned into jagged mirrors, valleys so quiet you felt like a trespasser in a cathedral built for no man. The silence played tricks on the mind. More than one soldier confessed at night that he kept hearing things out there, footsteps echoing our own, faint machinery running just out of sight. You learn quickly not to laugh at a man for saying that, because by the third week, most of us heard it too. Back at camp before our inland push, I'd gotten my first real look at the scope of Operation Highjump. On paper, it was the largest Antarctic expedition ever attempted. 13 ships, over 4,000 men, aircraft carriers, destroyers, supply ships, submarines. No training exercise needs that much hardware. Hell, some of us joked that we were better armed than we'd been in the Philippines. The brass insisted it was about establishing a research base called Little America 4, but there was no mistaking the military posture of the operation. We weren't just explorers. We were armed explorers, and that made all the difference. Admiral Byrd was the centerpiece. He carried himself like a man used to secrets. Tall, weathered face, eyes that studied people rather than places. He'd been here before, back in the late 20s, leading expeditions when the rest of us were still boys. To him, Antarctica wasn't just a blank space on a map, it was something else, something he spoke of with a respect that bordered on fear. In briefings, he told us Antarctica was the last frontier of human knowledge. He said it like he'd seen things here the rest of us weren't ready for. He never spelled it out, but the weight in his voice lingered long after the meetings ended. I remember one particular briefing aboard the carrier Philippine Sea before we set off inland. Byrd paced slowly, hands behind his back, and laid out the goals in clipped tones. Secure territory, test equipment, gather intelligence. But then his tone shifted almost reluctantly. He paused, looked each of us in the eye and said, "Above all else, men, you will keep strict records of anything unusual. Report up the chain. Do not speculate. Do not share with anyone outside your command structure. Antarctica is not as empty as it looks." He let the room stay silent. Not as empty. Those words burned in me, because they didn't sound like a warning about geography, they sounded like a warning about presence. The wreck confirmed it. We weren't out here chasing shadows. We were chasing something real. And whatever it was, the higher-ups wanted to keep it buried under layers of ice and silence. Life in Antarctica was a strange rhythm. We built ice runways for the planes, flew reconnaissance missions over ranges of mountains so tall they cut through the clouds, and dug trenches against the wind that screamed like artillery in the night. Frostbite became a constant threat. Men joked about losing fingers just to get a ticket home. But the humor was thin, stretched tight over nerves. The longer we stayed, the stranger things felt. One morning after a reconnaissance flight, I overheard two pilots arguing in the mess tent. They kept their voices low, but the canvas walls carried sound. I'm telling you, it wasn't a mirage, one hissed. It moved against the wind, and it climbed faster than anything we've got. His buddy shook his head, glancing around to see who was listening. You want to keep your wings? Then shut your mouth. Write what they tell you to write. I pretended not to hear, but I wrote it down later, in a private notebook I kept hidden in the lining of my pack. Officially, I logged weather conditions and supply counts like everyone else. Unofficially, I was keeping record of the things we weren't allowed to admit. I don't know why, maybe because I sensed even then that someday someone would need to know the truth. The secrecy weighed heavier than the cold. Even among ourselves, we started holding back. Conversations were short, guarded. When you're in the military, you rely on brotherhood, on the trust that the man beside you will bleed with you if it comes to it. But when orders tell you not to share, not to ask, not to speculate, that brotherhood phrase, we became ghosts of ourselves, present, functional, but hollowed out by the silence we carried. The inland trek took us farther than I ever thought possible. Days turned into weeks. Supplies ran thin, tempers thinner. At night, the temperature dropped so low that the moisture in our breath crystallized on our blankets, turning them into stiff boards by morning. Sleep became shallow, broken by the sound of the ice shifting beneath us. I'd wake with my heart racing, convinced the ground was about to give way, or that something was moving under it. Some nights I swore I felt vibrations, like distant engines humming far below the surface. I never spoke of it, but I wasn't the only one lying awake, eyes wide in the dark. One evening we stumbled upon something that shook even the hardest of us, a cavern. At first it looked like nothing more than a fissure in the ice, wide enough to swallow a man, but when we peered inside, the walls weren't natural. They were smooth, too smooth, as if cut deliberately. The opening stretched down into blackness, a tunnel leading deeper than our lamps could reach. We lowered a flare, watched its light vanish into endless dark, swallowed whole without touching bottom. The officer in charge, Commander Harris, snapped the order to seal the entrance. No record, no photographs. This doesn't exist. Do you understand? We understood. At least that's what we told him. But none of us slept that night. The thought of a tunnel, carved by hands unknown, burrowed into our skulls. The Antarctic ice was supposed to be untouched, primal. But that cavern told a different story. Someone or something had been here long before us. As the weeks dragged on, Admiral Byrd himself flew inland to inspect the sites. He didn't say a word about the cavern, though I was certain he knew. He only gathered reports, asked precise questions, and left again by air. It wasn't long after that his tone in briefings sharpened. He spoke less about research and more about maintaining control. He reminded us that not everything we encountered was for our eyes. That phrase stuck with me, not for our eyes. If it wasn't for ours, then whose was it for? The deeper we pushed, the stranger it became. Compass readings went wild. Radios crackled with static, sometimes with voices that cut in and out, foreign, garbled, impossible to trace. Once, during a whiteout storm, our convoy nearly drove itself in a circle, compasses spinning like they'd lost their minds. When the skies cleared, we realized we were miles off course, dangerously low on fuel. Harris called it a freak magnetic anomaly, but I'd flown in Europe, in the Pacific, in every corner of war, and I'd never seen instruments behave like that. The tension built day by day. Men grew irritable, suspicious. We started snapping at each other over nothing rations, sleeping space, who carried more weight. But beneath the surface arguments, I knew the real cause: fear. Fear of what we weren't being told, fear of what lay under the ice, and fear that if we found out too much, we wouldn't be allowed to return home to tell anyone. By February, weeks into our inland mission, morale was cracking. Some whispered of mutiny, though none dared act on it. That's when the Navy reminded us of our place. One morning, we woke to find 2 men missing. Their bunks empty, gear gone. No tracks in the snow outside, just gone. Hughes whispered to me, "You think they ran?" I shook my head. Out here, running meant death. No one walked away into the Antarctic night. If they were gone, it was because someone wanted them gone. That day, orders came down harder than ever. No speculation, no talk. Work, eat, sleep, obey. The silence became suffocating. I felt like we were prisoners of something we couldn't name, and yet in the quiet moments I kept writing, because every fiber of me knew we hadn't even scratched the surface of what this operation was really about. We had seen movement beneath the ice. We had found a wreck that wasn't ours. We had discovered a tunnel carved with purpose, and now men were vanishing without a trace. Something waited ahead, something the Navy feared enough to drown in secrecy, and I had the sickening sense we were about to stumble right into it. By the end of February, our days had a rhythm that barely held. Wake to the rattle of canvas and the brittle snap of frost on the tent ropes. Boil coffee that tasted like melted nails. Check the sled dogs. Scrape ice from the carburetors. Clean rifles, though no one would say what we expected to shoot at. Then walk roped always across a skin of white that groaned in a language we were learning to fear. We kept our jokes short. Little things kept us sane. Hughes swore the biscuits were repurposed shipboard deck plates. I teased him back that at least deck plates had iron. The biscuits were a rumor with corners. You cling to that kind of nonsense because the real talk stayed inside. Say nothing. Record nothing. Obey. On the 2nd of March, we had our first hard contact with the thing we weren't allowed to see. It started with an aircraft that never came back on time. 3 men took a reconnaissance flight at dawn, a quick loop over the mountains to check weather, glacier flow, and possible routes inland. They were due by lunch. When noon passed and the horizon stayed empty, Commander Harris sent me and 4 others to the ice runway to set flares and establish a line. "We'll bring them in if they're close," he said. He didn't say what we all knew, that if they weren't already within range, flares were prayers, not tools. The radio cracked at 12:30. Not voice. A tone. High, too steady, like a tuning fork pressed to bone. Then a tight burst of words chopped by static. 200 bearing 1-8 lights ascending. The rest vanished in snow. "Say again," Harris said, knuckles white on the mic. Silence. Then the tone returned, higher this time, like someone twisting a dial past safe limits. Even the dogs raised their heads and stared at the sky. We caught them 15 minutes later, a speck edging out of the sunlight. A skittering descent that didn't look like any landing pattern I'd seen. When the skids hit ice, the plane hopped once and slid too far, touching down past the flares, scraping sparks into the wind. The door opened before the prop stopped. The crew chief stumbled out and threw up into the snow. "Report," Harris said. The pilot's lips were blue. He stared past us as if the ice itself had eyes. "We were shadowed," he said. "It rolled from below. Not from ahead, from below." "From the ice?" and Harris asked. "No," the pilot said, voice gone flat. "From under the wind." He wasn't making sense. But then he did. The crew chief said they'd seen 2 lights pacing them, low and fast, ignoring crosswinds. No wings, no exhaust, just motion, clean and impossible, cutting arcs across the sky like a pen on paper. He said the lights climbed with a step, not a curve, straight up like someone was pulling them by a string. "Equipment malfunction," Harris said for the men standing nearby. "Sir," the pilot said quietly, "malfunctions don't cast shadows." We moved the plane into a windbreak and locked it up. No photographs, no written report. Afterward, the pilot sat with his back against a fuel drum, shaking in a way that wasn't cold. He stared at his hands like they were trying to tell him something. I gave him a cigarette. He didn't light it. He just held it like a handle to a door he couldn't open. That night, the radio tone came again, just before midnight. Same pitch as before. Then a new pattern, 3 short bursts, a pause, then 1 long, Morse without letters, a knock that didn't ask it, expected an answer. The radio man, a quiet kid named Coulter, kept looking at the tent flap like he expected someone to step in from the dark and ask for a seat. "What do we say back?" he asked me. "Nothing," I said. "We say nothing." We said nothing. The tone kept coming in the small hours, rising and falling as if circling. It set my molars on edge. I ground them until my jaw ached. Around 4, the tone stopped. The silence that followed felt like someone had opened a door and then kept it open, waiting. We were not alone out there. That was no longer a rumor to pass time. It had weight. 2 days later, we returned to the cavern, the smooth cut in the ice we'd been ordered to forget. Harris brought a small team and 2 of the new heaters, units with hoses we could feed into deep cracks, to warm the walls and check for structural drift. Just a safety check, he told us. Expedient, quick, nothing to note. The entrance looked the same. A clean oval, edges glassed by the wind, leading into darkness without texture. We set a tripod, ran a line, and lowered a lamp. Its glow made a perfect tube of light, like a drill bit made of fire. 50 feet down, the light shook, then steadied. A few flakes drifted up from below in a slow spiral that reminded me of ash. Bottom? Harris asked. No bottom yet, I said, watching the line slide through my glove. Passing 70, at 90 feet, the lamp hit something. The light didn't bounce. It softened, like it had pressed into skin. Bring it up, Harris said. His voice didn't rise, but everyone heard the strain. When the lamp came back, the lower lens was smeared with a dark film. It wasn't oil webs and breaks. This clung, and the steel buzzed faintly through my glove. I touched it with the edge of a canvas rag. It stretched and held, then snapped back into itself, leaving the rag clean. It smelled like a copper penny held too long in the mouth. Sample, Harris said. We tried. The film crawled from the spoon like it wanted the metal more than the air. It flattened against the steel, shivered, and went still. The hairs on my neck stood up. We bagged the spoon and sealed the bag inside another bag. On the way back to camp, we joked about it to bleed off the pressure. Hughes said we'd discovered the Navy's new shaving cream. I said maybe we'd finally found a substance that could make the biscuits edible. The laughter was short and hard like coughs. That night we had visitors. They came in a tracked vehicle that was not ours and did not belong to any flag we recognized. 6 men climbed down, faces covered with frost masks. The leader showed Harris a document in a leather folder. I didn't see the details, but I saw Harris read it twice and stand straighter the second time. Who are they? Hughes whispered to me. Temporary, I said, like winter. They moved fast. They had a black crate with rubber seals and a hand pump on top. They took the spoon bag and pumped the crate until the seals sagged inward. One of their men leaned on the lid as if the air inside wanted to push his hands away. The leader nodded once, said nothing, and loaded the crate back onto the track. As they left, he turned and looked beyond us, toward the inland horizon. It was the look you give a door you know you will have to open, and you wish someone else would. We called them Section Blue. No flags, no names, just cold. They did not sleep with us. They bivouacked on the far side of the fuel dump and kept their own watch. The next morning they asked for a flight. Harris said the weather made it unwise. The leader lifted his folder. The weather changed. I flew as observer, sitting behind the pilot with a field camera I was not supposed to carry. We followed Section Blue's coordinates to a valley where the ice ran smooth as poured glass. Halfway across, our instrument spun. The pilot tapped the compass like it owed him money. The radio hissed. The tone returned. 3 short, 1 long, and then vanished. Below us, the ice darkened as if a cloud had passed, but there were no clouds. The dark shape was under the surface, long and blunt at one end, tapering at the other. It kept pace. I pressed the camera to the glass and took 3 shots, cursing the fog at the edges of the lens. Then the shape slid away with that same stepping motion the pilot had described. Not a turn, a change of position as clean as a thought. Altitude, the Section Blue man said into his mask, voice flat. Up. We went up. The air thinned. The world below flattened into a sheet that held secrets like breath. When we landed, Section Blue took the film. I expected that. What I didn't expect was the way the leader handled the metal canister, palms open, careful, like he was passing a live bird to a child. That afternoon, the dogs refused to run. They leaned back in their traces and stared north. Not bark, not growl, just stare, tails low, ears forward. Their eyes looked human in that light. The handler tried to coax them. He tried a whip crack in the air. Nothing. Finally, he unhitched them, and they bolted not away, but in a tight circle, as if trying to make the world smaller and safer by running the edges smooth. I felt a tremor in the ice just after. It wasn't the usual settling. This rolled under our boots like a slow drum beat. I went to one knee and put my gloved hand on the surface. The vibration came in waves, 3 short, 1 long, a reply. At evening chow, Harris told us the official line. We were dealing with magnetic anomalies and optical illusions common to the polar regions. The missing men were likely victims of crevasse falls discovered too late to mark. The aircraft was stressed by cold and wind shear. The cavern was a naturally formed moulin, widened by melt. The radio tone was interference. The dogs were dogs. No one spoke. You don't argue with the story you're handed when the story is marching orders. After lights out, I lay awake listening to canvas sigh and snow patter at the seams. Hughes whispered from the next cot. You ever think about how far down this goes? The ice, I said. The other thing, he said. The thing beneath it. I didn't answer. I thought of the spoon with the film that clung. I thought of the shape under the plane. I thought of the tone that learned to match our knocks. The next day, Section Blue requested a small drill rig and a fuel allotment that would have kept a convoy warm for a week. They set up near the cavern, not at the mouth, but 20 paces to the east, where the surface looked the same as everywhere else. They drilled in silence. No banter, no curses when the bit caught. Just steady, patient work. The leader marked the depth on a clipboard with tidy numbers no one else was allowed to see. At 30 feet, the rig shuddered. The drill string rattled like a ladder thrown down a well. One of their men flinched and the leader put a hand to his shoulder without looking away from the gauge. Hold, he said. They held. The rig steadied. The gauge eased back as if something had unclenched below. They lifted the string inch by inch. The tip came up wet with the same dark sheen we'd brought home on the lamp. It beaded in the cold and then didn't bead, flattened and crept along the steel like frost, moving the wrong way. Section Blue packed the string section into a second sealed case. Then they did something none of us expected. They filled the bore with fuel and lit it. The flame sat on the hole like a coin, blue, steady, whispering. It burned with no smoke and no flicker, as if the wind had agreed not to touch it. After a minute, the leader nodded, and one of his men kicked snow into the light. The snow slid off without melting. He kicked again, harder. The flame went out like a switch. No one said a word. Even Harris looked at the hole as if it were a mouth that might decide to speak. The next incident came that evening. Coulter, the radio man, was on watch when the tone returned. He did not answer. He sat with his headphones on, pencil ready, eyes on the log he wasn't supposed to keep. The tone rose, fell, rose again. Coulter told me later he had the strangest urge to whistle back. Not a code, just a sound. He didn't. He wrote a single line and put the pencil down. Then a voice came through. Not English, not any language I knew. Smooth, low, and oddly weighted, like it had been recorded underwater and sped up until it almost matched our speech. Coulter reached for the transmit key. He didn't touch it. The voice paused and repeated a sequence. 4 sounds in a row, each with a different length. 3 short, 1 long. The tent felt too small for the air it held. I stepped outside and looked toward the cavern. The stars shivered, not with cloud, not with wind, but with a kind of shimmer you see over a hot road at noon. Except it was night. Except it was Antarctica. Except nothing should shimmer. Hughes joined me, breath steaming into the dark. We should go home, he said. Soon, I told him. It felt like a lie you tell a child, because the real answer would hollow them out. That night I dreamed of a city under the ice. Not spires or domes, not the kind of city men build and ruin. A geometry. Curves that became corridors when you stood close and became circles when you stepped back. I walked through them and heard the tone, not as sound, but as a change in pressure, like diving. When I woke, my cheeks were wet, and for a long minute I thought I'd frozen through, and the cold had found my eyes. We received new orders at dawn. They came by hand, not air, sealed and stamped with markings I didn't recognize. Harris called a brief. He read the orders without inflection. We were to shift our camp 10 miles east and establish a new set of test lines. We were to destroy the current runway and any structures not essential to transport. We were to keep no markers of our presence. The cavern site would be controlled by a specialized unit. We were not the specialized unit. What about the missing men? Someone asked from the back. Harris closed the folder. They've been accounted for, on paper. How? The voice asked. Appropriately, he said. I found Coulter after. He had the headphones around his neck, not on his ears. He showed me the line he'd written in his private log before the voice came through. It was one word underlined twice. Answer? The question wasn't technical, it was moral. It sat there on the page like a weight that could bend the desk in the middle. We began tearing down the runway. The planks sounded like drum beats when we pried them up. The dogs watched from their circle, ears quivering at each crack. The wind came up from the south and dragged fine crystals over the ground until our footprints vanished behind us as fast as we made them. Section Blue loaded their crates and their tidy numbers and climbed into their track. The leader looked at me once as they passed. It wasn't a challenge. It was a warning the way a lighthouse is a warning. Nothing personal, just physics. By noon, we were roped and moving east, the old camp shrinking behind us without leaving a shadow. The sky cleared to a blue so hard it felt like glass. The land ahead had no features. We walked into it anyway because orders are a path you can follow even when the ground offers none. 2 hours into the march, the ice boomed. Not a crack. A boom. The rope jerked. Hughes went to a knee. We all did the same and dug crampons into the crust. The sound rolled under us, low and round, and ended with a sharp knock that vibrated up my spine. 3 short, 1 long. We all looked at Harris. He did not raise his hand. He did not speak. He set his jaw and started forward again. We followed. 10 minutes later, a point of light appeared on the horizon, low and steady, as if someone had set a lantern on the ice miles ahead. It grew without moving. It brightened without approaching. Then a second point rose beside it, but higher, like a moon next to a star. The air between them shimmered so gently you could miss it if you looked hard, the way you miss your heartbeat if you try to hear it. Coulter whispered, "Do we answer now?" No one had to ask what he meant. The light pulsed, 3 short, 1 long. The rope between us went taut in a way that had nothing to do with weight. We were not trained for this. We were trained to shoot, to signal, to dig and endure and do as we were told. But whatever stood ahead of us was not in any manual, not in any whispered briefing or folded map. It waited and it asked and it knew the shape of our reply before we spoke. Harris lifted his hand, palm out, and I felt the unit settle around that gesture, like a body finding its breath. He turned his head just enough that the wind didn't take his words. "We go forward," he said. We went, my notebook heavy against my side where I'd sewn it in, the lights bright enough now to smear a pale line across the ice under our boots, and every step carrying us toward the moment that would split our lives into before and after. We moved toward the lights because orders told us to, but also because curiosity is a chain stronger than rope. Soldiers live on rules, but men live on questions. And those lights ahead of us, they were questions burning against the ice. The march was silent except for the crunch of boots. The air felt heavy, like before artillery fire, that strange stillness where your body braces without permission. The lights grew as we closed the distance. They didn't flicker. They didn't waver with the wind. They pulsed in rhythm, 3 short, 1 long. Every man in the column knew what it meant. We didn't say it out loud, but it had become a kind of language between us and whatever waited ahead. By the time we were a mile out, the dogs refused to move. They sat back in their traces and barked low, throaty, not at us, but at the horizon. Hughes unclipped his team, and they bolted behind the line, tails tucked. It chilled me worse than the air. A dog knows when a storm is coming before a man does. And these animals were telling us a storm was already here. Harris finally called a halt. We planted ice axes and huddled in a tight circle. His face was hard with frost, but his voice carried steady. "We hold position until further orders. Nobody advances on the lights. That's not our call." No one argued, but we all kept our eyes fixed ahead. The lights didn't fade. They sat on the horizon like they were waiting for us to blink first. That night, the radio tone came back stronger than ever. Coulter wore his headphones like a man about to confess. His pencil scratched the log. Then he froze, eyes wide. He ripped the headset off and held it out to me. I put them on. At first, only static. Then beneath it, faint and low, a voice. Not English, not anything I could place. The sound rolled smooth like someone speaking underwater, each word drawn out, vowels stretched. Then the pattern. 3 short, 1 long. A pause. Then silence. Waiting. "Answer," Coulter mouthed to me. I didn't. My throat was too dry. I handed the headset back, shaking my head. The silence on the other end felt heavier than the sound itself. Whoever or whatever it was, they knew we were listening. The next morning, Section Blue returned. Their tracked vehicle appeared from the south, carving black lines in the snow. They drove straight past our camp, toward the lights, like they had been given the coordinates days before. Harris shouted for them to stop, but they didn't even look at him. The leader rode standing in the hatch, face hidden under his mask. He raised one arm. Not a wave, not a signal, just acknowledgement. Then they were gone, swallowed by the white. Hours later, smoke rose on the horizon, a column, thin at first, then spreading like a bruise across the sky. We thought it was fire. We prepared water drums and shovels, but no order came to move. By the time dusk bled into the endless twilight, the smoke thinned and vanished. Section Blue never returned that night. I dreamt of the cavern again. Only this time I wasn't standing at the edge. I was inside, walking halls that curved tighter than any mine. The walls glowed faintly, as if lit from beneath the ice. I woke sweating, breath fogging the canvas above me. Hughes lay awake too, staring at the ceiling. "You saw it, didn't you?" he whispered. I didn't ask what he meant. "Yeah," I said. He rolled over and said no more. 3 days later, Section Blue's vehicle reappeared. But it was different. The treads were coated in ice like they'd driven through water and let it freeze solid. One headlamp was smashed inward, metal folded like paper. The leader was missing. The remaining men didn't speak to us. They unloaded 2 more sealed crates and set them beside the cavern, ignoring our questions. Then they drove away again, slower this time, machine groaning with every turn of the track. We never saw them after that. It was the 4th week inland when the real break came. We were ordered to scout a ridge 2 miles east of camp. From the top, the view stretched forever. Ice plains, jagged peaks, valleys filled with fog. And there, in the distance, something I still struggle to describe. At first it looked like mountains, black against the white. But as we studied them, we realized they weren't mountains. The shapes were too sharp, the angles too clean, like walls, like structures. "Geometry?" Hughes whispered. "Impossible," another man muttered. But the longer we stared, the harder it was to deny. They stood too regular, too deliberate. Tall spires, slanted ridges, almost geometric, not made by ice, made by intention. We sketched them quickly, hands shaking with cold and nerves. Harris told us to pack up, not to speak of it until back at camp. "The Admiral will decide what we saw," he said flatly. But we all knew what we saw, and it wasn't natural. Back at camp, tensions snapped. Men started arguing openly, about supplies, about orders, about the lies we were forced to swallow. One soldier, Ramirez, refused to stand watch, saying it didn't matter if we posted guards when the enemy wasn't human. Harris had him confined, but that only fueled the fire. If command was silencing men for speaking their fears, then maybe those fears weren't wrong. That night, a storm hit hard. Wind screamed across the tents, snow cutting like knives. In the chaos, 2 more men disappeared, their cots empty, gear untouched. No tracks in the snow once the storm cleared. Just absence. We searched for hours, calling their names, firing flares. Nothing. They were gone like the others. It broke us. Men stopped sleeping, stopped trusting. Hughes pulled me aside one morning, eyes bloodshot. "They're taking us," he whispered, "piece by piece. If we don't get out soon, we'll all vanish into this ice." I didn't argue, because I felt it too. The sense that the continent itself was swallowing us, one soldier at a time. Then came the order that nearly finished us. Byrd himself sent word. A special unit would push toward the structures we'd seen on the ridge. We weren't told what they were, just that we would secure a perimeter while the specialists conducted their work. No photographs, no notes. "You didn't see what you saw," Harris repeated. His voice cracked this time. We marched out at dawn, snow crunching under boots, rifles heavy in our hands. The closer we drew, the clearer the shapes became. They were no mirage. The structures rose from the ice like teeth. Black stone or metal, I couldn't tell. Some tilted, some stood straight. The wind howled through the gaps, making a low moan that set nerves on edge. When we reached the edge of the site, I touched one. Cold, yes, but not like ice. colder, denser, as if it drank the heat from my hand. The surface was smooth, too smooth. Even after years of war, of ships and planes and weapons, I had never touched anything that felt less like it belonged to Earth. We set a perimeter while the specialists moved in. They weren't Navy, not really. Their uniforms bore no names, no ranks, just patches I didn't recognize. They carried instruments that hummed and clicked, scanning the structures, running wires into cracks. One of them pressed an ear against the stone, as if listening. His face went pale and he backed away without a word. Hours passed. The specialists scribbled in notebooks and whispered among themselves. We stood guard, pretending not to see, pretending not to hear the low vibration that seemed to hum from the ground itself. It pulsed in rhythm, 3 short, 1 long. As dusk approached, Harris gave the signal to pull back. The specialists stayed, camping among the black spires. We left them there, shadows moving like insects against something too vast to understand. That night back at camp, none of us spoke. We sat around the stove, the air thick with unasked questions. Hughes finally broke the silence. "You know what they are, don't you?" he said softly. I shook my head. "They're not ruins," he said. "They're waiting for us to notice." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that it was just rock, just ice, just shadows. But my mouth was dry, and deep inside, I knew he wasn't wrong at all. We weren't explorers anymore. We weren't soldiers either. We were witnesses. And witnesses don't always get to go home. And in that moment, as the wind rattled the canvas and the ice groaned beneath us, I realized we had crossed a line. There was no going back. We thought the black spires were the worst of it. Strange shapes on the horizon, structures we couldn't explain. But they were only the beginning. What came after? That was when Antarctica truly showed us it wasn't empty. The specialists stayed behind at the site while we returned to camp. None of us slept that night. Every man lay in his bag, eyes open, waiting for something to happen. And then, just past midnight, it did. A low hum rolled through the ground. Not wind, not ice cracking. It was deeper, steady, like the drone of an engine somewhere below us. The sound made the stove rattle and shook frost loose from the tent poles. The hum grew until I felt it in my ribs. "Earthquake?" Hughes muttered, sitting up. "No," I whispered. "That's not the Earth. That's something inside it." The hum lasted 5 minutes, then stopped as suddenly as it began. The silence afterward was worse, like the world was holding its breath. Morning brought new orders. We were to march back to the spires and relieve the specialists. Harris didn't explain, but his jaw was tight, and his eyes told me something had gone wrong. When we reached the site, the specialist camp was empty. Tents torn, equipment scattered. No bodies, no tracks leading away. Just absence. One of the men whistled low. "Looks like they packed in a hurry." I shook my head. "Nobody leaves without pulling stakes." Look at the canvas. The tents weren't cut. They were pulled inward, collapsed as if something had sucked them down from inside. We found one notebook near a broken crate. Most of the pages were soaked, ruined by snow. But one was still legible. It had a drawing, a series of circles inside each other, connected by lines. Beneath it, a single phrase scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Not ruins. Signal." We searched the whole site, but the specialists were gone. Harris ordered us to strike what was left and haul it back. But as we worked, something strange happened. The spires began to glow. Faint at first, just a shimmer running along the black stone. Then brighter, a dull red that pulsed in rhythm. 3 short, 1 long. "Jesus," Hughes whispered. Every man froze, axes in hand, staring at the impossible. The glow bled into the ice around the structures, lighting cracks like veins. A low tone filled the air, the same pattern we'd heard on the radio. Only this time it wasn't in our ears. It was everywhere. Harris snapped us out of it. "Pack the gear. Now! We're leaving." We obeyed, but our hands shook. By the time we finished, the glow had faded. The spires stood black and silent again, like nothing had happened. But we knew better. We'd all seen it. We couldn't deny it anymore. Back at camp, morale collapsed. Men argued openly, accusing Harris of hiding too much, Ramirez shouted that we were walking into our graves. Another soldier, Keene, threatened to desert. Harris pulled his sidearm and told him flatly, "You step out there alone, you're already dead." The next night, it escalated. The hum returned louder than before. Our tents shook. Loose gear rattled. Outside, the dogs went wild, snapping at the air, trying to break their harnesses. I grabbed my rifle and stepped out, snow burning my eyes. That's when I saw them. Lights, dozens of them rising from the ice beyond the ridge. Not flares, not aircraft. They moved too fast, too clean. Each light darted upward, then sideways, then hung in the air as if gravity didn't apply. Some shot straight down into the ice and vanished. Others streaked overhead, leaving no trail. Men poured from the tents, rifles in hand, but none of us fired. What do you shoot at when you don't even understand what you're seeing? The lights gathered in formation above the spires, 3 short pulses and 1 long. The tone answered through the ground. "They're talking to each other," Hughes whispered. The formation broke apart and scattered in every direction, some vanishing into the horizon, others diving back into the ice like water. And then the night was empty again. By morning, Harris had new orders. Admiral Byrd himself had radioed through. Immediate withdrawal. The mission was over. No explanation, no reason given. Just get out. We packed in record time. No one argued, no one joked. We wanted off the ice, away from the spires, away from the hum. But Antarctica wasn't done with us. On the march back, the ground shook violently. Ice cracked like artillery fire. Ice boomed. A seam unzipped and ate a sled. Down there, a dull red throb, 3 short, 1 long. We scrambled, pulling ropes tight, dragging men away from the edge. The ground groaned like a living thing. Then just as quickly, it stilled. The fissure froze over, smooth as glass. Gone, like it had never been. We lost 3 men that day. No bodies, no graves, just names we would never speak again. 2 days later, as we neared the coast, the sky betrayed us. The first attack came without warning. A formation of lights, 6 descended from the clouds and swept across our convoy. They moved faster than any aircraft I'd ever seen, banking sharp at angles that should have torn wings clean off. One of our escort planes took off to intercept. It lasted less than a minute. The light slid behind it, flared, and the aircraft became a single line of falling fire. Panic set in. Men fired rifles upward, bullets vanishing into the air. The lights didn't flinch. They circled once, pulsed their rhythm, and shot straight up into the clouds, gone in seconds. When silence fell, all we heard was the crackle of the burning wreck. Hughes stared at the smoke, face pale. "We can't fight them," he said. "We're ants with sticks." No one disagreed. By the time we reached the ships, we were broken. Men who had survived Europe, the Pacific, places where death came loud and brutal, now looked like hollow shells. Antarctica hadn't killed us with bullets. It had killed us with mystery, with silence, with things we weren't allowed to understand. The withdrawal was chaos. Ships scrambled to load men and equipment. Admiral Byrd himself stood on deck, calm but grim. He gave no speech, no explanation, just a silent nod to every unit that boarded. But I caught one thing. As I passed, I heard him mutter under his breath, maybe not even realizing it. "They told us to leave." They. Not nature, not the weather, not the continent. They. The voyage home was worse than the cold. We weren't allowed to talk. Officers drilled it into us. What we saw was classified. We wrote reports that said nothing. We filed stories that erased weeks of terror. But men don't forget. Hughes never spoke after the lights. He just sat, staring out at the ocean, cigarette burning down between his fingers. Others broke in small ways. Shaking hands, sudden outbursts, silence that never ended. I kept writing in my hidden notebook, not because I thought anyone would believe me, but because I couldn't stand to let it all vanish into silence. On the final day before we reached port, I cornered Harris. I asked him straight, "What did we really see out there?" He looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were bloodshot, face drawn. Then he said quietly, "We weren't the first, and we won't be the last. That's all you need to know." He walked away, leaving me with those words. They were worse than silence. When we docked, reporters were waiting. They shouted questions about success, about training, about science. Byrd gave a statement, short and vague. He called Antarctica the last great frontier and spoke of mysteries that remain unsolved. But I saw it in his eyes. He wasn't talking about weather or ice or survival training. He was talking about the things we saw, the lights, the hum, the spires that pulsed like a heartbeat. And deep down, I knew something we all knew. We hadn't been exploring. We'd been warned. Warned to leave. Warned never to return. And the worst part, we obeyed. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in months, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the tone. 3 short, 1 long, a call, a question, an answer I didn't want to give. Because I knew if I answered, they would hear me. And if they heard me, they would come back. And maybe they never left. Coming home should have felt like relief. We were alive, out of the cold, back on solid ground. But relief never came. The war had taught me that surviving didn't always mean freedom. Sometimes it meant you carried ghosts no one else could see. And Antarctica had given us plenty of ghosts. The first days back were a blur of orders and debriefs. We weren't greeted as heroes. There were no parades, no handshakes from politicians. Instead, we were herded into rooms with bare walls and one-way glass, where men in suits asked us the same questions over and over. What did you see? What did you hear? Did you make records? Did you share anything with civilians? We learned quickly what they wanted, not the truth, the official version. Ice, wind, storms, accidents, anything but the lights, anything but the hum, anything but the black spires pulsing in rhythm like a heartbeat under the ice. I lied. We all did. Some better than others. One man broke. Ramirez. He told them about the fissure, about the glow, about the shapes moving under the sky. The next day he was gone. No one said where, no one asked, but we knew. He'd spoken when silence was the only order that mattered. After the debriefs, they scattered us. Different bases, different ships, different corners of the world. It was on purpose. Keep us apart so we couldn't share, couldn't compare notes. A unit broken is easier to control. I ended up at a stateside base, training recruits who thought war was behind us. I wore the uniform, taught them drills, drilled discipline into their bones. But at night, when the lights were out and the noise of the day faded, the ice came back. The hum, the glow, the pattern. 3 short, 1 long. I heard it in the pipes, in the rattle of radiators, even in the tap of my own heartbeat when I lay awake. I tried to tell myself it was stress, nothing more. But then I started seeing it in other places too. One afternoon on the training field, a recruit pointed up and asked about a plane moving strange in the sky. I looked. It wasn't a plane, just a glint darting sharp against the blue, gone before I could answer. I told him it was sunlight on a bird. He nodded, but I knew he didn't believe me. Weeks later, a radio operator I trusted handed me a slip of paper. "Picked this up last night," he whispered. It was a sequence of tones, 3 short, 1 long. I stared at it until the numbers blurred. "Delete it," I said. "Don't log it. Don't ever mention it again." He nodded, but I saw the fear in his eyes. He'd heard what I'd heard. The men I served with in Antarctica started vanishing in other ways. Some left the Navy early, discharged for medical reasons. Others were reassigned to quiet posts where nobody asked questions. A few disappeared entirely, names scrubbed from records. Hughes wrote me once, a short letter with no return address. He wrote only, "They're watching. Don't write back." That was the last I ever heard from him. I don't know if he ran or if someone made him disappear, but I know the warning was real. Admiral Byrd stayed in the public eye a while longer. He gave interviews, careful ones, always circling the truth without landing on it. He spoke of Antarctica as a place of mystery and hinted at dangers from the skies. Most people dismissed him as a man talking too big, but we knew he was holding back. Maybe he was protecting us, maybe himself. Then even Byrd went quiet. His expedition stopped. His name faded from the papers. Like the rest of us, he was folded into silence. I kept my notebook, the one I'd hidden in my pack, sewn into the lining, I read it sometimes late at night when the memories press too heavy. The pages are filled with sketches, half-legible notes, pieces of truth no one will ever want to read. I thought about burning it, but I couldn't. If I destroyed it, the ice would win, and I can't let that happen. But I never showed it to anyone. Not family, not friends, not the young recruits who looked up to me. What would I say? The war ended, but I found something worse. Something we can't fight, something we can't explain. They'd call me mad, or worse, they'd believe me. Years passed, life moved on, but Antarctica never left me. I carried it like shrapnel lodged too deep to pull free, a reminder with every breath. I married once. She asked about the war, about high jump. I told her the safe parts, the cold, the hunger, the frostbite. She laughed when I joked about biscuits harder than steel. But I never told her about the hum, about the spires, about the lights that move faster than thought. Some truths don't belong in a home. Still, some nights she woke me from dreams where I shouted in code. 3 short, 1 long. Decades later, when I read about new sightings, pilots reporting objects that outpaced jets, sailors describing lights under the sea, I felt the same cold from Antarctica wrap around me again. Different oceans, different skies, same rhythm. The world kept pretending it was new, but it wasn't new. We'd seen it in '47. We'd been warned already, and the warning hadn't changed. I sometimes wonder about the specialists we left among the spires. What happened to them? Were they taken? Did they learn too much? Or were they allowed to leave under the same silence that covered us? No records, no graves, just absence. Maybe that's the worst part of it all, not the danger, not the fear, but the silence. Silence turns men into shadows. Silence swallows memory until the truth becomes rumor. And rumor is easier to bury. But silence doesn't erase what we saw. It only hides it for a while. I'm an old man now. The Navy days are far behind me. The war feels like another life. But when I close my eyes, Antarctica is right there. The wind cutting my face, the ice groaning under my boots, the lights pulsing above the spires, the hum rattling my bones. Some nights I still hear it. 3 short, 1 long. I don't know if it's memory or if they're still calling. Maybe both. I never answer, because deep down I fear that if I do, they'll know I'm still here, and they'll come looking. And this time they won't let us leave. I've told you what I dare, not all of what I know. Some parts I never wrote down, and some I refuse to say even now. Maybe that's cowardice. Maybe it's survival. But after all these years, I know one thing. Antarctica never let us go. Men think war hardens you, that after enough battles, enough blood, nothing can shake you. But Antarctica was different. It wasn't bullets or bombs. It wasn't enemies you could see or fight. It was questions. Questions that followed you home, sat at your table, lay beside you at night, and questions can wound deeper than shrapnel. I sometimes wonder if we were chosen for high jump because we were loyal. Loyal enough to obey even when we knew we were walking into something we couldn't understand. They needed soldiers who wouldn't break ranks, who wouldn't shout the truth in crowded streets. And for the most part, they got what they wanted. We buried the story. We carried the silence. We let the official version live while the real one rotted inside us. But silence doesn't kill the truth. It only makes it heavier. When I read news today about strange lights in the sky, about aircraft shadowed by objects no one can explain, I feel the same cold breath of that ice field on my neck. People act like it's new, like the mystery just appeared. They don't know we saw it long ago, on the edge of the world, where the maps still leave white space. And if it's still here, it means the warning never ended. That thought keeps me awake more than the memories. Because if they told us to leave and we left, then what happens when we go back? And make no mistake, we will. Men never stop pushing. Sooner or later, someone will dig deeper, fly farther, step where we weren't supposed to. What happens then? I dream of the spires sometimes, black against the white, glowing with that pulse. 3 short, 1 long, always the same. In the dream, I walk toward them, rifle in hand, boots sinking into snow. But no matter how far I walk, I never get closer. The hum grows louder, pressing against my skull until I wake with my heart hammering and my sheets damp with sweat. In those moments, I tell myself it was just a dream, just memory twisting in the dark. But deep down, I don't believe it. Deep down, I think they still remember us. Maybe they're waiting. I'm near the end of my road now. Old bones, tired heart. Most of the men who stood with me on that ice are gone, buried under flags or lost in records that no longer exist. I carry what's left. Not medals, not glory, just the story no one wanted to hear. So if you take anything from this, take this. Antarctica is not empty. It never was. We didn't explore it. We trespassed. And when you trespass, sometimes the land speaks back. The ice spoke to us in tones we weren't meant to understand. We didn't answer then. I pray we never do. Some doors don't close, some warnings don't fade, and Antarctica still waits. You're still watching without subscribing? Make sure you don't miss the next story. Subscribe now and share with your friends. Tell us your country, the time you're watching, and any real-life incident like this, then post it in the comments.